Yeah, we're good. So I'll just go like that, and so it'll be good. Welcome.
How was your day? Oh, yeah, that's nice. Okay. That's okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Oh, no. She's fine. We just... You'll be happy. Yeah, it came down. Oh, yeah, I bet she Is there a battery inside there?
I don't know.
I feel
This is from the off 20.
Is that not the microphone? Okay, so that was the microphone that was up here.
You're gonna have to grab one from back here. I'm not sorry. The gold. Good? Yeah. 40th Street be well. Hello. I'll just walk by.
just in case we get separated in this future crowd. I need to get every time I drive by anywhere.
Did you get temperature? You were clerk.
There's no way I think a word about that.
I got gas. Tatum's gonna be late for drugs, so I hurried up and got $15 on the way to Redmond. And I stopped in Redmond going the rest of the way. And then when I got back, I used my debit card, Hy-Vee. The bank would only. But it wouldn't say which is stupid. It's not
Gridshock. It's made here in Iowa by survivors of sex trafficking who are born and raised in Iowa. So it does a good job depicting how close this is to home. It is very bold, kind of graphic, in your face at times. So if anyone needs to step out, please feel free to do so to take care of yourself. It can be triggering for some individuals. And then after the documentary is over, we'll have some time for questions or just kind of process through, what surprised you all or what you learned. So we'll save some time at the end for that. There are some times where there are like texts that you have to read. So for those of you in the back and those who are joining virtually, that's going to be hard to read. So I'm going to just pause the documentary and read it, and then I'll continue the documentary. So that way everybody knows what's being said when it's in writing. Okay? All right. I'm going to come down and push play, and we'll get started. Good? Okay.
I thought I could push play, but I couldn't. So, just a reminder for staff that are here with us this evening, there is a sign-in sheet on the east side here, so please make sure we get your name on that sign-in sheet.
citizens of this nation, as Americans, to bestow that right upon others, upon each other, and upon the rest of the world. But the right to pursue happiness for so many is stripped away. It's raped. It's abused. It's taken by force, fraud, or coercion. It is sold for the momentary happiness of another.
Okay. Are we on? Hello? Okay, so right here it says, what I'm going to share with you today is going to really bother you. I wish I could say I'm sorry, but I'm not. You should be bothered.
As a documentary filmmaker and survivor of sexual violence, I've made it my mission to expose ugly truths. In this pursuit, I examined a hidden industry that exists and fortunately thrives in the shadows of society. It's one of the most pervasive and disturbing crimes of all time: sex trafficking. The most distressing and often overlooked fact surrounding sex trafficking is that there are people willing to buy other people for their own sexual satisfaction. These buyers are the driving force behind this widespread industry. While many think this is only a problem in countries or large cities, that is not the case. These atrocities are occurring every day in our own backyards.
Could never happen in the Midwest. You know, we're rolling hills and highly conservative most of the time by nature, and so why would anything like this take place in a wonderful place such as Iowa?
People don't want to imagine that this goes on. It's such a horrific thing to think. I don't care what town you live in. I don't care if it's Des Moines, Iowa, or San Francisco, California. You don't want to imagine that this is happening to someone, that they're being trafficked, they're being slaves. It's a slavery situation.
I went to a meeting in Washington, D.C., and the ambassador there started talking about human trafficking. That's what they called it, or sex trafficking. And then he looked at me and he said, "Where are you from, Senator?" And I said, "Iowa." He said, "You're perfect. You have a giant rural area in which to save it and to protect it. And you have mainly an attitude that it's not here." Well, that's exactly where it is.
To gain a deeper understanding of the sex trafficking industry, we sat down with experts to learn what sex trafficking really is, who benefits from it, and who it targets.
To me, sex trafficking is the buying and selling of children and adults for anything of value. It doesn't have to be money. It can be drugs. It can be housing. It can be survival. It can be whatever it is. But a purchaser puts a value on it, or a trafficker puts a value on it, and they sell that human being. It's big business to them. It's a money-generating business. If you can sell a human hundreds, if not thousands of times. You can only sell drugs a couple times right before they're gone. So they know it's in their best interest to be able to move the product, which is the child or the young person, or it doesn't even have to be a young person. The product is the product. It's a human being.
You're taking ownership of this property, much the same way that we tattoo and brand and even implant chips in our livestock today. Same thing's done with these people. And so very quickly you understand that your status as a person has not changed to where you're not a person. You're a commodity. And the only reason you get to draw a breath is because you're producing money. When you stop producing money, then there's what we call the first rule of human trafficking. If it makes money, it's good. If it costs money, it's bad. And when you switch from making money to costing money, then you're a problem.
A perpetrator will learn a lot about their victims, and they will use that information to coerce them to do the things that they want them to do. So, for example, if they know that this child has a very close relationship with their grandmother. They'll threaten to kill grandma if you don't do what I ask you to do. So they use the knowledge that they build in the relationship phase, the recruiting phase of this, to manipulate them to get what they want. And traffickers will do what they promise to do if you don't behave. So physical abuse, up to and including systematic torture, would be imposed on a child who isn't behaving in a way that their trafficker has asked. They don't get to control who they have sexual encounters with. They don't get to control when they eat or what they eat, what time they get up, what they wear, the little things that we take for granted. They don't have any control over that. It's a very ugly and dark world, the things that people do to other people.
What I learned is that sex trafficking is all about exploiting vulnerabilities. What shocked me the most was learning that most people know the person who traffics them. It could be their parents, family members, friends, people who befriend them, or their intimate partners. The vast majority of trafficking doesn't involve kidnapping at all because it's really risky. Experts say that victims aren't always trafficked right away either. Oftentimes, traffickers lure them in and build a trusting relationship before forcing, frauding, or coercing them into the life. People are living and existing in our communities, sometimes in full view, and we have no idea they're being trafficked. Next, I reached out to survivors who shared their firsthand experiences. I'm looking forward to you sharing your truth because I think it's going to make such a difference, especially with the information that you have about the buyers. Like, you have very visceral stories about that. So I hope that you know that you're going to make a really big difference. So,
thank you. Thank you for bringing participants that I hope so.
Yeah. I think that, there's so many people that need to hear your story, so we're looking forward to it. If there's anything that you need, let me know. But otherwise, we will see you next week, all of us.
Okay.
Perfect. Of course. I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.
My name is Amber. I am an Iraqi war veteran. I am a single mother, and I am a sex trafficking victim. I was 16 years old when I met my trafficker. He was my pimp. I met him at a mall. I was homeless at the time, and when I met him, he kind of provided a lot of the things that I was missing in my life: shelter, family, support, love, and so I kind of reached on to that when he was offering me all these things. I was kind of dependent upon him. I didn't really have like a set routine where I had to be at home at this time. I was getting up or going to school or anything. So he really seen that my world was starting to revolve around him. I was basically sitting around waiting. When he told me to be ready at a certain time, I was ready, and I was okay with that. And I didn't realize he was grooming me, and he took me to his house one day, and there were 2 other women there, and that was it. I was in just like that. When we went out to the streets the next day, it was a training session for me, and basically I watched the older young woman, went on her dates with her, and it was a watching kind of thing, and nobody felt uncomfortable, and I was asked to join in a few times, and at that point I wasn't sexually active in a sense where I got gratification from anything like that. It was more so I've had a few traumatic experiences prior to that, so for me, I felt like she was training me almost in a sense of trying to empower me, to take power back. Like, I can get these men to do certain things, or, kind of going through like the negotiating process or terminology used, and I can say certain things and agree to certain things, but then, kind of how to speed the process along or kind of beat around the bush to get more money out of them. So just kind of like tricks or certain things. So there's been instances where I've had buyers, asking me to do like the role play and act like, I'm this schoolgirl or I'm their daughter, their stepdaughter, or stuff like that. I tried, if I would take the money and stick it in a condom and stick it up me, that was, once I started doing that, I kind of was able to keep it stashed at that point. So if there were days where I was short, I can take that money and put it with it and kind of get by. And yeah.
It says Amber was arrested 2 times as a minor for prostitution. She was not a prostitute, she was a sex trafficking survivor. Amber's trafficker left her on the side of the road after deciding not to pimp her out anymore. Her trafficker has not been identified or criminalized. She became homeless, but ultimately decided to enter the military, where she would later become an Iraq War veteran. She is safe and seeking healing.
Hey. Is now still a good time to talk?
Yeah, no, perfect.
Are there any things that you don't want to talk about?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess I'm to the point that if I don't share about it, it's not going to get out there and this stuff isn't going to stop. I think you have to make it real.
Right.
You can't give out. I mean, obviously there's some things that I have to be mindful about, like information-wise, but I think if they can put a name to a real face, like, helps make it more real in people's lives.
Right.
So,
I agree.
okay, sounds good.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. I'll see you soon.
You're welcome. Have a
Okay.
great week.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
I'm from southern Iowa, a small rural farming community. Very well known in the community. My parents owned a business, so couldn't go anywhere where I didn't know somebody. I was the straight A student athlete, did track and softball. I was your typical Iowa teenager, and I was headed off to a private college in Northwest Iowa. So I was working out in a gym on campus, and this gentleman came up and kind of introduced himself, gave me some pointers on how I was lifting, and just kind of like a normal conversation, like, you're a freshman this year, where are you from, what are you studying, and it kind of just evolved from there. A lot of talk, a lot of meetups at the gym. Eventually, things kind of went a little further. I had been dating him probably about 6 months, and he had learned everything about me. I mean, he knew there wasn't much that he didn't know. And so I kind of was like, what about your family? Like, how many siblings do you have? Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? And he was really hesitant on giving that information. And one time we were at his apartment in town, and he was in the shower because we were going to go out to dinner, and I noticed a text message came through. And this is probably December, and it just said, "Hey, are you coming to the New Year's Eve party, Dad?" And I was like, "Oh, well, when, in my head, I was like, when he gets out of the shower, I'm going to bring this up." And so he had gotten dressed, and I said, "Hey, I saw the message on your phone inviting us to a New Year's Eve party from your dad." I was like, "Are we going?" And he goes, "Oh, no, you don't
we were at his apartment, he was in the shower, and I was just hanging out, and his dad showed up, the same man from that night. And he just walks in and instantly comes up to me and like pins me like against the wall and was like, I saw what you saw that night, and you're gonna shut up. I'm gonna kill you if you talk. You are mine. And at that point, he raped me. And he, the man I was with, he just laid in his bed and watched it, didn't say a word, didn't try to stop it. And his dad finished up and was like, now when I call, you come. A few more weeks had passed, and I was walking from the dining hall back to my dorm, and a car pulled up and then came up behind me, put his arm, linked arms with me and said, you're coming with me. And I went to the car, and as soon as I got in the car, they gave me a shot, and I was gone. I woke up in like a building, and I would describe it kind of like a warehouse maybe. You could hear like other people and like kids crying, and I just remember being taken down a hallway, and there was individual rooms, and this girl came in and told me to go into the room and put the robe on. And then that night I was raped by so many men for hours. I was also microchipped, and so they knew exactly where I was. And the pain from the needle being like microchipped, like it took some time to heal. Like that pain, I mean, once again, like is a reminder that you're owned, that if you run, they will find you. And I think that was like the first sign, like that I'm trapped. I'm in something that I had no idea what it was, and I had no idea how to get out of it.
Heather 1 was a part of a large and organized trafficking ring. She was able to seek safety after meeting an advocate who helped her leave the life. After she got out, she was threatened and harassed by her traffickers. They have not been identified or criminalized. She is now safe and seeking healing.
Hello. Hello. Heather.
Hello?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you good now. We meet next week, and I just wanted to check in with you and see how you were feeling about everything. Seeing if you were ready.
Yeah. Yeah, honey.
Are you nervous about anything?
Not really.
Well, that's awesome. Do you feel like you need to practice anything or talk through your story at all?
No, I just kind of follow my brain.
Yeah.
You know, pretty good. So, just kind of like go with the flow and, kind of like I give speeches sometimes in regards to what happened. So, I just don't really prep. Kind of
Yeah, well, that's
tell the
okay.
story and answer questions. And,
Well, thank you, Heather. So send me
She was 21 and I was 16, and you know, we go to the party and she's very friendly. We're excited, you know, there's alcohol there and all this older folks, and it seemed fun. And we go there, and once again, you know, we don't have any plans really yet. She brings to us and she says that she lives in Cedar Rapids, but she gets welfare check in Wisconsin and in Iowa. And she's got to go out to Milwaukee to pick hers up. Do we want to ride with? Well, we're like, yeah, that sounds awesome, you know, big city, and we can come right back. And then we'll feel like my punishment's worth it at that point, you know, and it's like a 6-hour drive. And I remember it was raining there, and she made us sit in the car while she went in the house. We didn't think nothing of it. We sat back there, we were eating some McDonald's, and she was in it for like an hour. But we were too scared to get out of the car, and nobody wanted to get out, so we waited there until she came back out. And she said, okay, we can come back in now. But I noticed she's just a little different. She seemed more business. Like, she wasn't mean yet, but matter of fact. And we get in the house, and it was gross. You know, being from Waterloo, I've never went in the house, and like the furniture was liquor crates and egg crates, and it was just weird. And I was like, yeah, we gotta stay here. And me and Crystal looked at each other, and Crystal ended up asking her, are we gonna stay here? We're kind of hoping we weren't, but yeah, we were staying there. And they were always whispering to each other. It was the woman trafficker and another gentleman. He was a trafficker. He stayed there with his girlfriend, and they had like 5 young kids there that were all under, I would guess, age 7 or 6. And it was noisy, loud music, but they were really talking to each other and kind of ignoring us. So we were just talking with each other. It felt awkward. And in the upstairs, there was like a bathroom, which had roaches in it. It was so disgusting. Then there looked like what used to be like an old like kitchen or dining area, but nothing was in there anymore. And then you go forward, there was the bedroom where they locked me in, like right away, by myself, like just put me in there. And I didn't realize I was locked in right away. I didn't know what it was. It was just so over the top. She came to my door, and she had a tire iron in her hand, which I like noticed right away. And she just went like this, and I come out with her to the living area, and she had me stand against the wall, and she like hit me with the tire iron on my back 16 times. She asked me how old I was, and then she just kept doing it. And then she told me that this guy's coming over later, and he's taking me out, and you just do what he says. I don't want to hear no shit from you, blah, blah. Like, this is all just, I don't even want to cry, because I didn't know if that's going to, like, set him over the edge, but, like, I was in a lot of pain, and I didn't know, like, if I had a bone broke, I'm, like, in shock, you know. And she told me to use the bathroom. She stood in there like a prison guard while I was in the bathroom. She washed me up, gave me clothes to put on, and then she went to walk me back down the stairs, and that's where a guy come to pick me up, and he was part of the traffickers. They had a routine, and she was walking ahead of me a little bit, so she was talking to him on my way down, and she told him, if she doesn't do what you tell her to shoot her, it's not going to make a difference. They're runaways. Like that, you know. He tried to play like the nice pimp, basically. He said, when's the last time you ate? How do you feel? He was just, so concerned, you know. Took me around in this truck. He told me, well, they want me to take you out and sell you tonight. Just straight up, you know. He was like, I don't want to do that to you. He's like, I hear you're a runaway and you wanted to get away from home. You weren't expecting all this. He's like, let me go to a gas station. I'm going to go get you a soda and a sandwich. And then he takes me in a truck and he goes, well,
he coached me what to say. He's like, but I'm gonna have to have sex with you because I have to have something like payback for being nice to you, you know? And then he just raped me in the front of the truck, you know? And it was like an out-of-body experience. Like, there's just no words.
Heather, too, was able to leave the life after alerting the store clerk at the department store that she needed help. The store clerk took her to the security room and called the police. Her traffickers who were waiting outside were arrested, and they arrested several other traffickers after raiding the house she was kept in. She was returned home to her family. She is now safe and seeking healing.
On average, I mean, a typical night would probably be like 8 to 10 men. Obviously, weekends were always a little different. Weekend times generally would be 30, 40 to 50 a night, just depending on the situation. You know, the 12-hour period, I made $60,000. Like, there's 56, you know, men, give or take a few, in one night, and that's not uncommon. I mean, it's been thousands. I couldn't even tell you how many men and women that I've been sold to. I try not to think about it because it's disheartening. You know, in my head, like, how am I ever going to explain that to a future spouse? Like, by the way, you know, I don't even know the times, but I just know it was all night. I could be raped easily 20, because I call it rape, even though it's like a John. I mean, because it wasn't consensual. So like 20 to 30 times. And then the male trafficker I had at the house would always rape me off and on.
When it's looked at it as we put ourselves in those situations, or we don't call it rape, we can't call it rape. So it even took me, after joining the military and going through all this training and talking to counselors, to really come to terms to, you know, what I had been through. Like, okay, people used, you know, your vulnerabilities and certain things against you to control you or to make you do these things, and to really realize, like, I had no power in that situation. Regardless of how much money I thought I was making, at the end of the night, I was handing it all over to this man and barely getting enough, you know, to take care of myself and the things that I need.
After hearing the accounts from survivors, I was interested in how the industry functioned. I had an opportunity to speak with a researcher by the name of Michael Shisley. He had researched regarding the fundamental elements of what drives the industry.
At its root, it is the commercial enterprise. It's market-driven, and any market is easy to break down, and it's useful to break down as having three major components, and that's supply, demand, and distribution. Commercial sex is really driven by consumer-level demand, and as a concept, it's essentially refutable, and I've yet to hear any argument that you could have a commercial sex market or you could have a sex trafficking enterprise that would exist if it weren't for the consumer level. It's just essential and fundamental, and it drives everything else that happens. So, it's the revenue stream for sex trafficking is provided by the man who buys sex.
What are the buyers willing to pay? For what sex act? From who? And from where? You know, if you break down any other product that way, any other business and industry that way, you determine a price.
What is a pimp without a buyer? A pimp without a buyer is unemployed. Without buyers, there is no sex trafficking. The only trafficking that occurs is if there's an exchange.
There's no money to be made if nobody's buying. And so you have to make what they want available to them. And that's essentially what happens.
It's now become clear that sex trafficking is fueled by buyers. Without the demand, there would be no supply. But who is the demand? Who are the buyers? I wanted to know the answers to these questions. Most of them had at least a college degree. Many of them had more than that. And so essentially the picture that we get from that data is an everyday average man who has a job, has a family, and probably nobody suspects that this is going on.
Some of the research that's available out there shows us that that as much as 81% of the people who do the buying have no prior criminal history, which means that they're not on law enforcement's radar. In a nutshell, it says it could be anybody. You know, there's no profile for this person. If you understand profiles, you understand that they're built on statistical databases based on prior similar types of offenses. And that's how we identify the characteristics and those kinds of things. But there's so little research in this area, and it's so diverse, you have a much better chance of guessing what a bank robber looks like.
A buyer can be anyone. We've had school teachers, we've had military, we've had bankers, we've had law enforcement, it doesn't matter. Anyone can be a buyer if they make that choice to purchase another human being.
You know, artists, photographers, like family man, military man, like they are everyday men.
That's what really amazed me is the array of people that were out there trying to purchase sex from these people.
The pervasiveness of who is buying them, where they are being bought. You know, I think we as Iowans frequently say things like, oh, it's only at truck stops or it's only in massage parlors. And it is so much bigger and so much more broad than that.
And the houses that we would go to aren't like your drug, like breaking down houses. These are like multi-million-dollar homes in some instances. I mean, you had your home next door, you know, with the big porch on the front and the swing sets in the backyard. I see school books in the car. I seen car seats in the car, which they will just lay you on top of and have sex with you in their kids' car seats.
A lot of the buying is kind of linked to the workday. So Monday morning is a huge demand time because those buyers have spent the whole weekend with their families, and there's also a lot of purchasing that happens after work, kind of in that, you know, before work or after work period, as well as over lunch breaks.
The vast majority of the buyers are men. And I would extrapolate that more broadly to lots of other sexual crimes. The people collecting child pornography, the people who are molesting and raping children, they are men, by and large, the vast majority. That is just true, and we may as well be honest about it. It is absolutely a male problem.
I mean, these are men with money, men that put on a suit and tie every morning and go to work. I remember one guy, he was probably late 40s, heavy-set guy, seemed real nice. I felt like this might be an opportunity. Maybe I can get him to like speed off and like, he seemed so caring, you know. But the minute I even mentioned that people had control of me, basically I think is how I worded it, and I made to do it, he got nervous and he just wanted to have a sex and go.
The idea that they don't know that these are just prostitutes, quote unquote, is ridiculous. Just how many steps that buyer had to go through in order to obtain this person, and how many times that alarm bell actually rang and said, this is wrong, this is illegal, this is trafficking.
Statistics show that for every time you get arrested for drunk driving, you have driven intoxicated or impaired 100 times. That's probably very similar in this industry. These people are looking for something where they wouldn't go out and risk their reputation by buying. Nobody walks up to the erupting volcano and says, huh,
mine. After several weeks of research and networking, my connections had been exhausted and my search had come up empty. I was about to give up hope when someone named Teresa Davidson reached out to me. Teresa is the founder of an anti-trafficking group that not only provides resources for survivors, but also offers groups for recovering sex addicts and buyers. Hey, it's Vanessa.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good.
Good. I appreciate you reaching out to me last weekend, and I'm really excited to learn more about Chains Interrupted and all the really cool work that you're doing.
Good.
Do you have any program that reaches buyers or Johns?
Yes, we do. We have the Foster Care program, and we realize that pornography has a very direct link with human trafficking, and so we have started with that. And so we currently have 9 now groups of men so far.
Do you think that there are men in that group that would be willing to speak with us?
Yes, I think I know I have one man who has made plans to purchase sex. He was married and he was watching pornography and his wife caught him watching pornography, and that, that whole life that he had of porn blew up. There's another gentleman who, I don't know if I would call him a gentleman, but he does purchase women for sale for sex. He has no remorse over that. He would be able to tell you how he does it, how he would do it today, where he would go. He would brag about it. If you would want that sort of interview, which you might, because it would show the audience just what attitudes are. He treats women as objects. He doesn't think of them as human. They are there for his sexual pleasure. They are there for him to use, and he has no apologies about that.
Wow, okay, yeah. Please let me know when the two of them if they would like to do in-person, phone call, what have you. So just let me know as soon as you can, and you can text or call this number.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Will do.
Well, thanks for all the work that you're doing, and we appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Of course. We'll talk soon. Okay, bye.
Okay.
Only one of the two men Teresa spoke about agreed to be interviewed by us. We interviewed a man named Christian. He is a pastor and recovering sex addict who describes his motivations behind wanting to purchase someone for sex.
When I was 12, my friends and I found a porn magazine in a neighbor's dumpster. That's kind of where it all started. By the time I was 15, I was watching porn and masturbating once or twice a day, and it was awful. The porn addiction was terrible. It was so bad that I couldn't go on a 3-hour plane ride without having to go to the bathroom and masturbate and get a release. I was about as addicted to porn as you probably could be. Then people started telling me as I started getting older and I was still having this porn addiction of once or twice a day, people started telling me, when you get married, it's going to get way better. Like, if you get married, then you can have sex whenever you want, and then you won't want to look at porn. And so I got married, and I found out that wasn't the case at all. What I found out was sex is hard. It takes effort. It takes time. This continued for a few years into marriage, even in the ministry, when finally my porn addiction had escalated to the point where I wanted to do to women what was being done in porn, and my wife wasn't having any of that. And so I started looking at brothels online in Reno, where they are legal, at least where I assumed they were legal, and pricing out a trip for how much it was going to cost for me to go and to hire a woman or multiple women to do the things that I wanted to do.
How much were you planning on paying for someone that you were going to buy?
I was looking at spending about $5,000, which is not money that we had to spend, but that's what I was willing to spend.
And what would $5,000 pay for?
So discovered my porn addiction. She did something really amazing. She didn't yell at me. She didn't slam the door in my face. She hugged me. She cried with me. She loved me. And that really started my healing journey. I started fighting against the porn harder than I ever had before, but I still couldn't break it. I still had the addiction. I remember being so sick. I desired pornography so bad, and I was allowing myself to lust so much that I felt like I was going to die if I didn't look at something, if I didn't get a release. Porn addiction is very scary because the internet is fast. It's easy to hide behind. You can look at child porn. And when I say child porn, I'm not talking about toddlers or 5-year-olds. That's a different subset. And I think there is some serious mental health issues that go into that young of child porn. I'm talking about early pubescent girls. Girls who have just gone through puberty, being very attractive. And that was definitely something in my addiction that I can personally say it definitely interested me. It intrigued me. It was taboo. It was arousing. Most of the men that I talked to would agree. In fact, I've had conversations with men who said, I wish it was legal to sleep with 14-year-olds because I find some 14-year-olds very hot. There is a significant number of men who would be willing to pay for women who are younger than 18, for girls, for children. Most buyers think that they're not going to get caught. And they think that if they do get caught, there's not going to be severe consequences. Sadly, most of the time they're right. And that leads to a greater problem in the sex trafficking industry.
For Christian, his interest in purchasing sex stemmed from an early introduction to hardcore pornography. But ultimately, the decision to engage in sex trafficking can be determined by a variety of factors. The reality is, as long as there are people who are willing to buy other people for sex, we will always have sex trafficking. Regardless of what motivates the buyers, I wanted to know how they continue to fuel the industry without consequences.
What are the charges against Johns? Some type of prostitution charge, which is usually a misdemeanor offense. And there's other, there's fines and surcharges and those kinds of things that go along with it. A felony, in this case a Class D felony, is punishable by up to 5 years in prison.
If that person who is being sold is 18 years old or older, they would be charged with an aggravated misdemeanor. If that person is under the age of 18, they would be charged with a Class D felony.
Most of the time, the people that are arrested are the victims of human trafficking, and they're labeled as prostitutes.
The traditional law enforcement model is that the survivors have committed a crime and are charged with that crime. The traffickers creep off into the night, and the buyers go home to their wives.
I think there's a culture of impunity for buyers. I don't think the culture is sufficient to fully hold buyers accountable. And I think it's difficult for law enforcement to roll that all the way back to figure out who all did what, where, and when. If we could solve those problems, we'd realize there's probably a lot more people that are walking free who have raped children.
We have it ingrained in our social consciousness, for better or for worse, prostitution is no big deal. And as long as we believe that, then human trafficking will never be a big deal, because we think it's prostitution. So clarity and understanding what is the difference. And the difference is choice.
But we're starting to look at those cases now as human trafficking, that the women or girls who are engaged in the business of prostitution usually are not there voluntarily.
It brings up the old bias that we all have to prostitutes, that it was their choice, that that was a profession that was okay. I think really anymore the word prostitute needs to be done away with.
The ultimate goal you want is to, yes, you want to get the victim out of the situation, but you want to stop another victim taking that person's place. And the prosecution of the John or the buyer is the way to do that.
On misdemeanors, you can negotiate jail rather than a prison sentence. So it still matters, it's still on the record, but the long-term effect, even if they are convicted of prostitution and sentenced to prison, they never serve 2 years because that's the structure of our system. You get earned time, so you'll never serve the full 2 years.
You know, at the very least, if it's a first-time offender, it gets on paper compared to not at all. It's hard for us to swallow too because it's, you know, it's an investment that we put into it. It's time that we've met with that victim and talked to the victim and tried to gather evidence. And it's almost hard to tell them that, you know, you almost feel like you let them down a little bit, whereas, you know, you're doing the best that you can with what you have present, because sometimes the evidence is a lot harder to obtain than you'd think.
I think we need to take a much more aggressive approach with the buyers, and I think we want to out them, we want to make them famous, and we want to put them in jail for the rest of their lives. This is a crime. Crime's crime, right? I mean, there's always a victim of crime. But in this case, there is a victim that who's had their heart and soul destroyed for the rest of her life. And there's really no crime like that. So I think this is one that would take some special attention.
You could never be over anything like that happened. You know, it changes your life. It changes your peace of mind. It affects every decision you make when it comes to who you let in your life, or you're never over it. I'm never over it. I have reminders. Imagine being sexually, you know, involved, giving somebody, you know, our most prized possession, who you are as a woman, the very thing that makes you a woman, giving it to somebody over and over and over again. These men are always in my head. I think about them when I'm showering. I never feel like I'm clean enough. I feel like mentally, I never get a peaceful moment.
Other people that went through this don't live within the dark like I did for so long, because it will tear you up, you know, and you have to speak out. I want to just give them like a little strength to do it, to speak out, because if you don't, like, look how many decades it took for this to even happen. Like, you gotta have a voice and you gotta speak up, or they're just never gonna be brought out of the darkness.
What does freedom look like to you?
Freedom is very scary. It's kind of like learning how to walk again. It's hard. Here I am at, you know, going on 28, and I mean, virtually being free for the first time since I left home for college. It's exciting. I would say it's exciting and scary. Trying to make my own decisions. Like, even little things, like before I had to keep every receipt. Like, I was controlled by money. And, like, knowing that, like, if I just buy a pop at the store, like, I don't need to keep the receipt. Like, being able to say, no, I don't need the receipt, or throwing it away, like, as stupid or silly as that sounds to, like, normal people, like, that's a huge thing for me. Knowing that, like, this is my money and I can spend it how I want to. Just being able to get up every morning and, you know, if I don't want to get dressed to the nines or put on, you know, makeup, I don't have to, because I am free and I am my own person.
This is either going to be a sustained effort, and when I say sustained, I mean from the highest levels on down, putting the resources exactly where they need to be, both for before and after. Or we're just kidding ourselves. I think trafficking is not going to go away. The best we can hope to do is make Iowa the least hospitable place for it to exist.
But I also think that all of us have an obligation to the next victim, and the next victim, and the next victim. Because in my experience, the people who commit these crimes are predators. And they will not stop unless someone else stops them. Just as a human being, forget for a second the consequences, forget for a second punishment. Just as a human being, look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself whether your sexual gratification is worth exploiting another person. And if so, why? Why are you special that you get to do that to someone else so that
be about trafficking in general.
Is this the same video the kids watched?
I'm sorry?
Is this the same video that the students watched?
Yes, yes it is.
So I noticed, I think it was on the first two women that spoke out, it said that they're safe in seeking healing, but it also said that their traffickers were never caught or prosecuted. At least with the second one, it sounded like she would easily be able to identify some of these individuals, and I just didn't know what the process there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the victims most likely know who the trafficker was, right? Especially in her case, she met the family, she was dating him for a while, right? I don't know exactly for her case, but they could either be in the process of prosecuting, so they can't share details, or a lot of times victims, they don't want to press charges. It also mentioned like she was harassed once she got out. So, they could have threatened her. If you do press charges, well, we know where your mom lives, right? Or something along those lines, some kind of threat or coercion so that she wouldn't press charges. And a lot of times, if a victim does decide to press charges, the whole trial process, it's very traumatic. She's forced to relive her story 20, 30 times, telling it, breaking it down in details, right? Getting kind of nitpicked. Well, what time? Well, you said 9:30. Was it 9 or 9:30? Well, what were you wearing, right? Kind of those types of questions that we often hear in trials. So a lot of victims just decide, I don't want to pursue like any kind of prosecutorial thing. Great question. Any other questions?
Pornography seems to play a pretty big role. For years, growing up and as a young adult, I would hear pornography downplayed. It's mainstream, it's harmless.
Right.
What it sounds like to me, that's the beginning of a lot of problems for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. In this gentleman's case, he referred to his porn addiction as kind of his source of wanting to purchase sex. And I've heard other sex addicts at conferences say the same thing, that they got their start by watching pornography. So yes, I think that there can be a connection or maybe a correlation there. Not everyone who watches porn or is addicted to porn obviously is going to purchase sex from a person, but that is definitely something that I think a lot of researchers are kind of starting to look into now. So yeah, absolutely.
Pornography stimulates in your brain the same portion of your brain as methamphetamines and cocaine. It's just as addictive if you have the personality type for that.
Thank you for sharing that. For those of you maybe over here who couldn't hear, she said pornography stimulates the same part of your brain that maybe like methamphetamine would, right? Am I correct in saying that? So it kind of triggers that same pleasure center of the brain.
And they identified these buyers have to they have to have somewhere to ask to start these purchases. And so have they developed a pattern to how you figure out how you break down a ring like this a little bit with that kind of stuff? I mean,
yeah.
It doesn't just.
Yeah. So for instances when a person is buying somebody and it's not kind of pulling up on the street and seeing somebody and buying them, but it's more planned out. They see an ad, they message the number that they want, to purchase a date. There are research organizations that are trying to track that. Law enforcement is watching that. I don't think that there's an exact or kind of a good algorithm to really pinpoint it down. There was at one point and if any of you have ever heard of Backpage, that was by far where the majority of interactions, like exchanges, were taking place. The federal government shut down Backpage, and ever since then it has kind of scattered, so it's made it much harder to determine where people are being advertised or where people are seeing these ads or how they're contacting them. And there's sometimes when it's on just dating apps, Craigslist, and then right now because a lot of the world's virtual or remote, that's kind of increased those websites. Now there's OnlyFans, which didn't exist before, and now that exists. And so it's kind of constantly evolving. So I think they are trying to kind of narrow that down, but it's just, I think, kind of growing faster than they're able to get ahead of it.
Those were all girls and boys do that?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, all of the victims on here were female, but there are male victims as well. It's just not as talked about, not as easily identified, right? But there are male survivors of sex trafficking, and then there are both female and male survivors of labor trafficking as well, which this documentary just focuses on sex trafficking, but labor trafficking absolutely is happening all over, even here in Iowa as well.
Taylor, this morning when Mrs. Burton was talking to the high school students, she said, one of the things that I want to bring this to your attention, not only because you're going to be moving out into the world and you're real soon, but the idea of the exposure of these things at events, large events, such like concerts, state fair. Would you talk a little bit about?
Sure. Yeah. So any kind of large community event that draws people in can draw in buyers and traffickers, right? That's definitely something we see. College World Series, for example, not too far from here over in Omaha, they do see, higher rates of trafficking, and that's because there are buyers who are traveling into Omaha, right? And so, definitely like events, concerts, or those are times when you might see a spike. Now that's not trying to make you guys all scared of going to concerts. Traffickers are looking for vulnerabilities, right? So they will scout and see who looks vulnerable to them, who's sitting by themselves, or who just got in a fight with their friends and their friends stormed off, right? They'll look for those sorts of vulnerabilities in people, and that's when they approach. So just always kind of being aware of your surroundings, being aware of how you are presenting yourself, just to always make sure you have kind of that protective factors in place, right? People with you, people who know where you are, that type of thing, for sure.
You might share some of the questions that the kids asked you because you were talking.
Sure. Yeah, so I had a lot of great questions from the students this morning. One student, they wanted to know kind of just about funding, like how our program is funded. So we are a nonprofit. So I was kind of explaining how we're grant funded. So we're funded by private donors, we're funded by state programs, state grants. And they asked a lot about advocacy, like how they can advocate, for legislative changes, right? So we talked about how they explain in the documentary that prosecution, typically the person will not serve even 2 years in jail if they're caught. So how can they advocate to change that? So we talked about writing letters to your House of Representatives or your senators, right? We talked about VOCA, which is a big federal fund that was recently cut in the state of Iowa by about 10% from what it was last year, which is it's a big cut. So talking about how to advocate for just more funds for nonprofits, how to advocate for different prosecutorial charges, differences. I had questions about just how victims kind of succumb to this. I know we heard 3 kind of examples, but it's sometimes hard, I think, for people to well, how did she fall for it, or how did she not realize sooner and get help? So we kind of use the analogy of the frog in the hot water, right? And then you kind of keep turning up the heat, and the frog doesn't realize it's getting too hot. So we talked about how grooming happens with trafficking, and how slow and methodical the traffickers are when it comes to pushing those boundaries of their victims. So the one female was in a relationship for 6 months. That's for a high school age, she had just graduated high school, was in college, that's a long-term relationship. So, you really get to know somebody in 6 months pretty well. And nothing was out of the ordinary in those 6 months. So it's just very slow, very precise. Let's see, this is my grandma, everybody. What other questions were asked? Can you remember? Put you on the spot. Yeah, they wanted to know a lot of red flags you could watch for, that they could watch for amongst their peers. So we talked about how that there are a ton of red flags, but not any one of them can definitely indicate trafficking for sure. So, we talked about somebody who's normally very outgoing, active, social, and then maybe all of a sudden there's a change. They're withdrawn, they seem depressed, they're introverted, right? A change in personality, that can be a sign of trafficking or abuse in general. We talked about how somebody having multiple cell phones or multiple IDs can be a red flag. If somebody doesn't have access to their ID, somebody else keeps it for them. That a lot of times traffickers will do to kind of have one more level of leverage on somebody. We talked about how traffickers will withhold medical care and withhold food from survivors. So, watching for any of their peers that maybe need to go to the doctor and they haven't gone and they're not sure why, or who seem malnourished, or of course just any kind of physical abuse, marks, bruises, right, or anything like that. Those are some red flags. The students had a lot of great questions. We had a really long conversation afterwards.
I wonder if construction workers that come into an area for 6 months to work in that area, if they're a possible problem. Are motel managers aware, and do they have any way to deal with things they see in the motel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I offer hotel and motel trainings to staff, so I'll go out and train them if they want that. Some hotels, their corporate requires trainings, and I know in the state of Iowa right now, there's a coalition trying to piece together. They want it to be a uniform training across all hotels, so they're developing that training and trying to kind of roll it out across the region. I don't think that's fully been developed yet, but they're working on it. I know Nebraska has done that, and they've already started doing their training. So Iowa kind of saw Nebraska having success with that and said we should do that too. So yes.
What are the motel workers' options? Do they call law enforcement?
Great question. Yeah, they definitely can call law enforcement, and they can even report anonymously. This is what I'm noticing. Something just doesn't feel right. I want someone to come check it out. They can report an anonymous tip on the National Human Trafficking website. There's a link once you go into the website that says report a tip. It asks you all the information. You can remain anonymous if you choose, or you can put your name and contact information if you want, law enforcement to be able to reach you if they have further questions. But the way the hotline works is they will then take that report and they will funnel it based on location to the appropriate law enforcement in that area. So I always like to say that to people because it can be dangerous to intervene directly. If someone's being trafficked and you go, hold on, she's not going with you, right? That can be dangerous for you, but it can also be dangerous for the victim as well. The trafficker may think that they like flagged for help or something along those lines, or you didn't play cool enough that they noticed something. So I always tell people if it's, you know, it's not always safe to intervene. It's sometimes safer to take information and make a report right away. Like I can give an example. About a year ago, maybe a little bit over a year ago, it was winter. I was at a gas station in Omaha, and I noticed a young female in the car with an older male. And that wasn't suspicious. It was like around 3:30, school had just gone out, it's a gas station, that's pretty typical. You know, that's something you may see. But what kind of made my red flag go up is she was dressed very nice, except for her feet. She was only in socks. The socks were very dirty. They had a lot of holes in them, but the rest of her outfit was very nice. So, you know, it kind of sent a red flag up that, did he take her shoes? You know, does he make her wear those so she can't get away? So, you know, with him being there, I didn't intervene directly. It wasn't safe to. I just took license plate, what gas station we were at, which direction they were headed, what make and model the car was, and I reported it to the national hotline. So always kind of keep that in mind if you see something, but definitely if you see something, say something, because if it doesn't seem right, it's probably not.
If you happen to be, you're a woman and you're in the women's restroom and the young girl that you're wondering about was in there, do you say anything to her or not?
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like she's not with the person that's controlling her in that moment, you can definitely, you know, say, hey, like, hey, are you okay? That's, I think, totally appropriate. You just have to also be aware that women can be traffickers too. So, you know, maybe the girl next to her washing her hands is her trafficker, or maybe it's another girl that's being trafficked, but they kind of have like a chain of command. Who's been there longer, right? They want to be the trafficker's favorite because the favorite gets privileges. They get to eat. They get to sleep in a bed. So, you know, she might say, yeah, I'm totally fine, but that could be because if she says anything different, the girl next to her is going to go and tell the trafficker, hey, she snitched in the back room, right? So, it's worth checking. Hey, are you okay? But you might not get someone to identify. I would say most of the time, if they are trafficked, they probably won't identify themselves.
So it's better to call the hotline versus calling like the cops directly?
You can absolutely call the cops directly. I just use the hotline because in that instance, like there wasn't like an imminent danger, right? Like I didn't know, maybe she just had fully socks, right? But you can definitely, if you feel like this is time sensitive, you can always call law enforcement and make that report, you know, make that call. And then they, I mean, it's not your job to like determine it, right? So leave that to them. Like, hey, I don't know, but you need to come find out for me, right? And that's totally fine to do. I think they would rather call and it not be a trafficking situation than you not call and then later it was. For sure. Was anybody surprised at anything in the movie?
I'll just be real honest, how many times they were trafficked in an evening, I'm trying to do the math. And I'm also thinking about her physical condition. How does a woman's body handle that without having a lot of really bad effects, you know, like infections or other things like that? I just don't understand how that could be. And I don't know how, if it's like an every night thing, or if it's, you know, I can't imagine that the body could handle that.
Yeah, it is like mind blowing. You know, she said on the weekends it could be up to 50, 60 guys in a night. And yeah, how does your body tolerate that? So trafficking victims they will sustain injuries, right? And STDs and STIs are common. I think traffickers a lot of times encourage like use of condoms or protection so that, you know, it limits maybe the need to go to the emergency room or the clinic, because a lot of times that's where victims are identified by medical professionals. lot of the girls didn't say their towns, and when she said Waterloo, I was like, wow, I've been there, I know where that's at. And when the other girl said Southern Iowa, I mean, that's us, we're in Southern Iowa. We don't know if she was east or west, but she could just be from here, who knows, right?
Taylor, what do you recommend for parents who have kids going off to college in the next couple of years, or thinking about this, or just moving out of town, going to events? What advice do you have for them about talking to their kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you have children that, are in this age, they're in middle school, high school, going to college, and as much as they probably don't want to have this conversation with you, I think it's important to keep an open, honest line of communication about sex trafficking and sex in general. What is a healthy relationship? What does that look like? What is a controlling partner look like? And just letting them know that, this topic's not fun to talk to your parents about, but it's important, and so I just want to have this conversation with you and letting them know that it does exist. It can happen to anybody. Nobody's immune. And just kind of keeping that kind of open dialogue, for sure.
I invited law enforcement to join us, and I know they're extremely busy, but when I did call them, I said, well, will you share what would be the message that you would share with the audience? And they said, it's real, it's happening here. It's not far away. Does anyone here have you been through a training before, been through something like this? Okay, yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've experienced, or?
Well, I used to work at a university in Michigan. So they had a couple of different, actually they mentioned, I think the name of the one, it was called Free, I forgot the name she said, but it was probably over 7, 8, probably 9 years ago that they came to the university, and they had kind of developed a website and stuff that you could go to and talk not just about sex trafficking, but just trafficking in general and fair trade type things, and how to look for products and things to support that. But it wasn't as in depth as this video, I would say, but mainly just bringing awareness to. They talked about we in Michigan, where we were, from Chicago to Detroit was a big trucking, so a lot of it was geared more towards that, and then talking about spas. So this was a good eye-opener to realize that it's not just those places, because that was a big focus at that time because of where we were located. So.
When Elizabeth comes to us, and there's over 100 cases, and 60,000 people, but you would think we would know that.
Maybe it wasn't the documentary, when I watched this through the virtual session that you had, Taylor, that people were talking about spouses who've been through the training because they're in the transportation industry. They're training truck drivers what to look for. Yes, too.
Yeah, they are trying to roll out trainings to, there's an organization called Truckers Against Trafficking. So they're trying to spread awareness. I also try to reach out to truck stops and offer just a training to staff, what they can watch for, what they can do if they're seeing any signs of trafficking. And so I also see you later a lot.
I was going to share. Taylor, thank you. You
I
have a lot of material.
I brought, and feel free everybody to take this stuff with you, but it's resource information. So it has the national hotlines, phone number, text number, their website. It has our 24/7 crisis number, and it has the Iowa helpline, which is a statewide 24/7 crisis number that's kind of a one-stop shop. If you say, hey, I know, say a victim calls, I've been trafficked, I need a shelter, I'm in Sioux City, they'll be able to tell them the closest place that they can go. So they kind of have a directory of all their resources.
there's kind of a typical stereotype of a girl that fits into that? Did you cover that?
There's not, unfortunately. It's any age. I work with like clients who are young, and I work with clients who are going into their late 50s. Any race, any gender identification, any sexual orientation, any level of education. A lot of times people think it's people who didn't finish school, but I've worked with survivors who had college degrees before they were trafficked. So it can really happen to anyone. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about grooming? Because that's probably something lots of people don't know the intricacies of and what they're looking for, and how that happens.
Yeah, so she asked if I could talk a little bit about grooming. So I'll talk about recruitment and grooming because they kind of happen like simultaneously. So I mentioned that traffickers kind of scout for vulnerabilities, right? There have been, here in Iowa, traffickers who send out young, handsome boys to go to like football games, and they look for the girl that maybe that's kind of chilly as fall, right? Doesn't have a coat, right? Or she's not dressed for the weather. So that kind of cues them in that maybe she can't afford one, right? Or maybe her parents can't afford one. Or kind of looks to see if somebody has a vulnerability, like they don't maybe have a home life that's super supportive, right? So they want to fill that void, like, well, I can be supportive. If someone's addicted to substances, and traffickers see that, they'll exploit that. They'll say, well, I've got, whatever the substance is, and, you can hang out, and so that's the recruitment. And then they start the grooming, right? So once they identify who they want to traffic, they'll start to do the grooming process. And so this is just a slow push of the person's boundaries. Again, like that frog in the water, right? Where the water's getting warmer and warmer. They'll slowly push their boundaries, right? They'll maybe get them to do something that they're not fully comfortable with, but they'll ask them to do it to see how they respond, right? Are they gonna like hold their ground and say, no, I'm not doing that? Or are they like, am I able to sway their opinion, right? So then they will slowly push the boundaries further and further and further, just to see if they can. If they can, that's when someone's at really high risk of being trafficked, right? Like, they'll, over time, maybe now they're the person who's supplying clothes for the victim, food or shelter, right? Maybe they live with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever that relationship is. So after enough time goes by, they kind of make the person dependent on them. They'll isolate them socially. Hey, let me read your text messages. No, you can't talk to him anymore because I think he likes you, block him. And maybe she blocks him, right? So he's learning, okay, I can get her to cut people out of her life. And so, maybe it's like holiday time, and he's like, I don't really want to go to your mom's for Christmas. I don't think your mom likes me. Can we skip it? Maybe she agrees. Okay, I can isolate her more. So eventually she's dependent on the trafficker, right? And then that's when he kind of flips and says, well, I've done X, Y, and Z for you. What are you going to do for me in return, right? And she might love him, so she'll do it. Or she might feel indebted to him, so she'll do it. And maybe she does owe him money. Maybe she borrowed money, or so it really can just depend. But those are just kind of some examples that traffickers use for grooming.
So can grooming occur without anybody being tied to a trafficker group?
Yeah, grooming can happen when someone is living their everyday life, right? They could go to home and school and work just normally, but the trafficker will still find those opportunities to kind of push those boundaries for sure, yes. I think one of the girls here, she was a student. She's going to school normally, but when the trafficker said, give me my car, right, she wouldn't go because he had threatened her family's life. It's definitely happening in plain sight. We've probably all crossed someone's path in our lives someone who's been trafficked and not known it.
say you were in Omaha, is the information, I can't remember what you said, like, is there a number for Iowa, a number for Nebraska, or is it just a general? Just with where we live, you could be Missouri, Iowa, you know,
Yeah, that's
just
a good
thinking of
point.
a situation one time, it's like triggered me, and I just.
Yeah, the organization I work with, Catholic Charities, it's just in Iowa, southwest Iowa. But if you are interested in learning about, like, I can tell you, like, if you want to talk to me after.
Yeah, I was just curious.
There are organizations in Nebraska. It's not.
I didn't know if it was like a.
Yeah, they kind of break it into regions.
Okay.
So some of the Nebraska agencies would be like Heartland Family Services, Women's Center for Advancement, and there is a Catholic Charities in Omaha, but it's DV, domestic violence and sexual assault. I don't know if they have something specifically for human trafficking, but they do have a shelter.
But like if you saw something like you did at the gas stations, what I'm saying, then that's where you would.
This national hotline.
Then that would be,
That's
yeah,
the
the national
national-
hotline.
okay,
Yes,
that's
I
what
see
I
what you're saying,
was-
yes. So then it would be, yeah, you could always call the national hotline and they cover all of it.
I was thinking more like the red flag situation, you know, that you were just.
Yeah, then it would be the national hotline that you want to use, for sure.
I guess I have one more question.
Sure.
Are you aware of any schools that have taken a proactive step of any kind in working with the youth to, let's just say young men, to teach them respect, for instance, teach them to, try to encourage them to respect instead of lust. You know, I mean, I can understand why schools think that that's not their area. That should be the parent, that should be the church. Okay, but have you observed any school that's maybe a parochial school? You know?
So I haven't seen a school that's specifically targeting like the males on how to like respect women. But I'll say in my time as a human trafficking specialist, this is the first school I've done a Gridshock showing to. So that's proactive. You know, men and women saw it. We do have a prevention specialist, and she goes into a lot of high schools. This year with COVID, it was kind of iffy if schools were doing that, but she does an MVP program, and that teaches all about what a healthy relationship looks like. If you're a bystander and you see something, what you can do or how you should respond. There is an organization, and they cover Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota. It's called the Set Me Free Project, and they start as young as 3rd grade and do a curriculum, and it's all about human trafficking. Now, 3rd grade, they make it age appropriate, so in 3rd grade, they're not talking about sex trafficking, right? They're talking about internet safety and healthy relationships and boundaries, but it goes all the way to college age. And then there is an organization out of Nebraska, and I think they do some traveling. And it is what you're saying. It's a group of guys who get together and they mentor young men on how to hold each other accountable. What's okay, what's not okay in relationships. So yeah, there are a few in the area for sure.
And I can kind of share on that.
Great.
At the high school last year, we implemented MVP in classrooms here at the high school. COVID kind of put a kibosh on that because of interactions between classes. Leader in Need is another thing that we're instituting this year with our students, and MVP will probably be more re-implemented next year at the high school for sure. It's definitely positive because it's students leading students in that aspect. So, and we talked about some pretty tough conversations and a lot about scenarios and options that students can do, that things they may run into. So it's there. We need to do a better job with it, I think.
Awesome. Thank you for speaking to that.
I might call a former high school graduate out. It's okay. Mackenzie, you're in college now, right?
Yep.
Have you had any exposure or training, learning at any of it?
Well, they realized right when we started Thanks, Ally, I'm not sending her back down.
I know, after I watched this, I had to go to the lead center to pick up my son. Lo and behold, I couldn't find him. And talk about just that immediate panic after watching something like this, where you just question. So I happened to be talking to the ladies that were there, and they, I think, go to school in Ames, and I said, tell me, are you familiar with trafficking and what it is, and have you had exposure, and has your university done some education on it? And they said, yes, they have. And so I just assumed that most colleges were doing something like that. You're at UNO, right?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, so yeah, where that campus is,
And we've actually, she and I had a conversation about this a few days ago because her car broke down on the interstate. Through the top of state. Well, and I'm not, but her car broke down. Yeah.
we all know, sorry.
Her car broke down on the interstate
You
and,
know what to do next.
yeah, I mean, you don't let anybody, just anybody help you. I mean, trust anybody. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but there's a number you can break down to call. Oh, okay. Right. No, 211 is kind of like a resource center, so you can call 211 and say, I broke down, who do I call? And they should be able to give you a number. State troopers go out on those calls.
I guess the thing, like, with Mackenzie up there, this, like, girl was just a college student going to work out. But, I don't know, did she go to the gym the same time every day, which college students do because they have an hour to go work out? They go the same time every day. You know, important to say maybe don't have the same routine that her boyfriend or whatever knew when she was gonna be there.
Yeah, and that's very possible that he, like, kind of stalked her a little bit.
Like,
before.
she came every day at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
So it was easy to find her.
Yeah, that's very possible, and that could happen.
She wasn't homeless, she wasn't starving, she wasn't in a fight with her parents, she
had a lot of.
She wasn't a runaway, she was working out.
Right. That's scary. Yeah. No, yeah, that's why I say that no one is immune. Of course, there are risk factors that make people more vulnerable, and there are protective factors that kind of help shield people, but she had a ton of protective factors and still was a victim, so absolutely.
With that said, as you get ready to send your kids off to college, what is the safest route to know if they go somewhere, have to go to the bathroom? I mean, I avoid rest areas like when my kids were little and even now, but like gas station, you know, you hear about it all the time on 80 or whatever. And I mean, what do you recommend when they're traveling alone?
Yeah,
I always drive with them.
Yeah, no, I always tell people that, so we're biologically animals, right? And we have this gut instinct that if something feels wrong, we get that. And we don't know why or what it is, but we're uneasy for some reason. I always tell everybody to trust that because that's there to protect us. If we can't consciously say why we're uncomfortable, but our body's telling us something's wrong, then it probably is. I also tell everybody if it's too good to be true, it is. It is too good to be true. Like, don't trust it, right? And then just there's other protective factors that you can always do in your situations. Parking under street lights, right? Not going to your car alone, right? Always kind of the buddy system. You know, if I'm going somewhere alone, I text somebody where I'm going, so that, you know, they don't hear from me in an hour. Like, they know to be worried. You know, just those kind of safety plans that you can put in place, you know, ahead of time and kind of just start practicing in general, for sure, to help kind of just protect yourself. I'm not trying to like freak everybody out, but I feel like everybody's going home like to talk to their kids because they got so there. So I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just want to make everybody aware so that they can protect themselves and you know, protect their families.
Well, and you don't want the naive piece with where we live is real. I mean,
yeah,
there are things you're not going to know or experience, so having them all prepared for that, I guess, is.
yeah, absolutely.
My grandma's here. This morning.
Yeah, that's why my grandma came with me, so that's true. So yeah, I always try to have somebody with me or let them know at least what time to expect me. Here I'm coming from Florinda and I'll be home at 9:30 tonight, so that they
Have you noticed on the news or online, they've been several sex trafficking rings around the U.S. They've caught 20, 30 people. Do you guys keep track of that, or is that even on your radar?
I mean, we kind of take note of it, because I think nowadays it's a lot more common to see it on the news than it was, a couple of years ago. I think it's on people's radar more because, because of trainings like this, the word's getting out, and so that's kind of increasing prevention, and then that's increasing down the line, people are watching for it, they're doing something about it, so that's probably why we're seeing so many.
And Jeffrey Epstein might have something to do with it.
Yeah, big name pop events that like Jeffrey Epstein for sure, like R. Kelly, people are seeing these more, they're learning more about it. It's not becoming so much of a taboo topic to talk about, and so because of that, you're seeing so many more busts. So, I mean, it's a good thing.
I think there was just one in St. Joseph not very long ago, right?
I think that's what someone said this morning.
It was,
Yeah.
truck stop, I'm not.
There was truck stop in St. Joseph,
It was
busted.
big.
Yes, one of the students just pointed it out to me this morning. I hadn't heard that one, so.
I'll correct my statement.
Sure.
We were talking, MVP has actually lasted longer. Because it worked with some other classes. We had our upperclassmen work with our ninth graders. I want to say 2 years ago. So it's been good. So I'm hoping that we start with it again.
You say it started at 9th grade?
They have upperclassmen through Mrs. Amelie with student council coming down and mentoring. It's a UNI's program, right? University of Northern Iowa started the Mentors in Violence Prevention. We had some teachers.
I'm not sure who
that got
started
training.
it, but.
It's UNI, University of Northern Iowa. And it's good because it puts them through
You got
scenarios.
upperclassmen coming down
Yeah.
and working with middle school kids?
They work with the ninth grade now that we're 7, 12. It should be that. But kudos to Mrs. Amelie for starting that, getting those conversations going. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a great program, for sure.
but I think they probably did some stuff at the middle school building before we brought it up here to the high school.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, like you said, they have student
Didn't they?
leaders
Yes.
that kind
I think
of.
my father did that.
And teachers are, under that system, are to, they're there to discipline just in case somebody's not listening or we have a student that's not interacting appropriately. But really, it's run by the students. The idea is, I think a lot of times, students will take ownership from other students better than they maybe will an adult. So it just strikes up those good conversations that they need to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that program include stuff for female in general, just thinking about the vulnerable girl and how the cliques and the stuff that can happen that can ostracize different girls to feel vulnerable or want the attention from these traffickers? Is there any talk about how to empower these girls so that they feel a sense of connection or not being excluded or and there's so much more that can go into that with social media and the stuff that gets put behind the scenes, but just really encouraging girls to, and just side note, I worked at a university with girls in particular, and so there was a big push for talking about a lot of the things that you're saying of, not putting yourself in vulnerable situations. So I didn't know if there was talk about girls, A, not putting themselves in vulnerable situations, but B, also creating a culture where there's not so many vulnerable women or girls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm not sure if MVP kind of emphasizes that or not. If you know, feel free to chime in. I'm not sure.
MVP covers way more. It's a lot based on scenarios, and it covers way a lot
want to protect ourselves, so we always say like go in groups and like don't park in dark places, right? But like someday I hope that our culture shifts to not saying like don't put yourself in these vulnerable positions, to shifting to the perpetrators don't perpetrate, right? Instead of, but for now I think that's where we're at. So until there's like a cultural shift, yeah, you want to cover kind of both sides of that, for sure. You guys had a lot of good questions. That makes me happy.
You did a great job this summer. You are welcome to as much of this material as you'd like to take home with you. On this one, if you have a place of work that you think that would be a great place for this to be on display, make sure you grab the cardstock and then also the little sheets that you'll need to attach to it. And please share if you have ideas of additional learning that we can provide. We want to know about those so we can continue these conversations, because I think it is really, really important to have these. And how do we continue it is all of us going out and sharing what we learned tonight with other people in our community. So, and because great families are here, we have a lot of teachers here that are showing their support, and I greatly appreciate that. But, you know, and we have families, we have parents, we have community members, so let's spread the word of awareness, and if you have ideas of continual learning, please share those. So, thanks so much.
Well, that's what I was
Yes, go ahead,
wondering
Mike.
too. What is our follow-up with our students after they saw this today? And
You know, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So Emily, who is here with Taylor, she's the one who meets with MVP.
because I'm sure they'll go